Right. Today's lesson, lesson 58, types of anatomical structure. We will be able to group anatomical structures. So we're just going to quickly touch on three quick ideas here. I've tried to, now I did this lesson really quickly, so because I did this lesson really quickly, don't expect, flashbang slides. And the idea as well is to try and go through this content quickly so that we can work on some of the work on a worksheet that I'm going to set for you guys. Now, this worksheet that I'm going to set is actually going to be, this worksheet that I set is actually going to be something we're going to work on period 6. So we're going to work on that period 5 and period 6. So, yeah. Not period 5, I meant period 2, period 6. I'm not sure if someone's correcting me. Right now, but yeah. Oops. Just plugging my laptop in because it was running out of charge. Okay. When is 3.9 due? 3.9 is due next Wednesday. So that's something else you guys can work on today as well, is wrapping up 3.9. Okay, so anatomical structure. Before we talk about anatomical structure, let's talk about what do we mean by anatomy. Anatomy comes from last lessons. The last lesson we talked about was homology. Now, homology is the study of the similarities in organisms. This could be similarities caused by organisms in their anatomy, in the way that they're shaped, because anatomy is a study of the body structure, or there could be similarities in behavior as well. And of course, different points along the evolutionary journey have caused these animals to evolve differently. Before we talked about homology, we talked about, well, what were the ways that we can check whether evolution exists? What are the current proofs that we have for evolution? The current proofs that we have for evolution include fossils, which we talked about before, anatomy, so comparative anatomy, so comparing anatomy of different organisms, molecular evidence, so that's what we talked about in the appendix question, looking at DNA, and embryological, so we're looking at like the shape of embryos of different animals and stuff like that. So we talked about fossils. Yep, great, cool. We've already discussed them, so we move on. Homology, so we're looking at the different shapes of structures in different animals and different, also structures in plants as well. We talked about comparative anatomy, so that's when you, comparative anatomy is when you go and you go, okay, well, how do these compare? How does this bone, how does this arm shape look like in a human compared to a horse? Like, what's going on? What's similar? What's different? So on and so forth. And we talked about molecular biology, so DNA sequences. In fact, and this is one of the key things, DNA is a great proof of evolution, because like it's very unlikely that all these animals somehow all ended up with DNA, and all these plants end up with DNA. It's more likely that we all came from a common ancestor. So millions upon millions upon million years ago, there were like one plant would have evolved into a banana, and that plant also evolved into a human being. So that's why, and because we evolved from the same starting thing, some ancient banana human thing, that's why we both have DNA. So we talked about DNA, we talked about how you can measure the percentages. This is the genes. So if you're looking at the genes, yeah, that's why we said we're 30% with yeast, because 30% of the genes we share. That's not necessarily meaning that our DNA, all of the DNA, we're 30% yeast. That's not how it works. And if you look at it, the genes actually make up a small part of the total DNA. And I guess that sort of, this looks at amino acids. I included a picture on this slide. So, yeah, the reason I included a picture of this slide is because just why not? And then we looked at comparing embryos, and that was it for the lesson. Today's lesson, we're going to look at anatomical structures. So we've already talked about what anatomy is. It's looking at the body structures. We're going to look at 3 different types of body structures. And when we compare body structures, these are really useful for comparing them. We're going to talk about each of these, and we've already sort of talked about them. All we're doing is we're giving them a name. Okay? So these 3 ideas. We're going to start with the first idea. What are the anatomical structures we're going to talk about? We're going to talk about homologous structures, analogous structures, and vestigial structures. I'd like you to jot these 3 down. We're going to explore each of these 3. Go back to what? Go back to this. This has been up for like 5 minutes. I will keep this up for another. What am I going to do? We're going to say 30 seconds from now. If you haven't got today's lesson copied down, this is your chance. I'm going to go back. I'm going to finish this, move on from this in about 20 seconds. $15, 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so what are the structures that we're looking at? We are looking at these 3 homologous structures, which is is a way to look at anatomy. We're looking at analogous structures and vestigial structures. We're going to talk about each of these. Now, because I was writing this lesson, as I said, very, very late, I'm not sure, I may not have done a very good job of summarizing the information. So one thing I usually do for all my subjects is this. Whenever I make a slideshow, what I do is whenever I make a PowerPoint slide, I usually take a bunch of information and I put all the information on there. And then I look at that and I think, if I was a Year 10 student, would I want to write down all of that information? And then I'm like, no, there is way too much information. So what I then do is I then go back and I cut a bunch of stuff so that, by the end, there's only like a couple of words. And even then, students still complain, there was too much writing on your slides. It's like, if you knew how much text there was on my slide before I cut it down, you would be shocked. So yeah, one of the problems we have though is that I didn't get much time to do much of this editing. So you may have to summarize some of this stuff on your own. What that summarizing is actually a really good skill. You don't have to write down every single word. You only write down the key ideas. So let's jump ahead now. We're going to talk about each of these individually. We're going to start with homologous structures. So, homologous structures, yeah, definitely could. The homologous, homo means the same, by the way. So, Homo erectus means all the same sort of things. Homo sapien means the same. A homosexual is someone that likes someone of the same sex. So homologous means the same. In this case, we're looking for the same type of structure in 2 or more organisms. These these organisms are related. So if you see the example of the homologous structure is the same picture again. We can see that there is an arm. There is a similar arm, hand, limb structure are found in multiple animals. So in cats, in humans, in dogs, in whales, in horses and bats, they all have this hand structure. Now, of course, we know from looking at all those other slides that the hand has different bones in different places, different lengths of different bones and stuff for different animals. So, but what we can sort of say is, in general, they are still the same structure. This is a homologous structure because they're all the same thing, they're just shaped differently. Now, the other part that goes along with this is that because these are different, we know these are caused by divergent evolution. As time's gone on, it's been more beneficial for whales to have long fingers to use as part of their flippers rather than short fingers for picking things up like in a human. That's caused by divergent evolution. We also know that even though there is divergent evolution, because both whales and humans have this arm with fingers and bones, they must be related. All four of these animals were related at some point. They're relatively closely related. So that's what a homologous structure. Homologous means it's the same structure. It's like a lot of animals have arms. A lot of animals have legs. A lot of animals have lungs. The lungs might look a little bit different from certain animals, but we all sort of have these lungs, homologous structures. If you're looking in plants, you know, a lot of plants have stems. Sometimes these stems look like small things. Sometimes they droop. Sometimes they turn into tree trunks. But, you know, like they all have this stem. The stem is a homologous structure. I'm going to leave this up for another 30 seconds. Again, if you haven't got all of this copied down, remember to summarize it. But then I'm going to move on in about 30 seconds time. All right, the next type of structure is called an analogous structure. Now, if you know what an analogy is, you probably can start to figure out what an analogous structure is. An analogous structure is another way of an analogy is another way of explaining something. So an analogous structure does the same job, but in another way. These do not have common ancestors, and they're examples of convergent evolution. Now, we've already talked about convergent evolution. If you don't remember what convergent evolution is, it's when two animals adapt the same kind of structure, behavior, or technique, but they don't have a common ancestor. And the example for us is the wings of the bird versus the wings of an insect. So on the left here, we've got a bird. It's got a macaw, I think. No, actually, it's not a macaw. It's a parrot of some kind with a big set of wings here, which have got these feathers. Whereas on the right, we've got a bee. Now, the bee has wings as well, but these wings are small. They are very, very lightweight. They look like they're made of some kind of, I'm not actually sure, but some kind of cartilage structure. And they're almost transparent, but they have definitely not got feathers. Now, both of them look similar, but they don't have a common ancestor. There wasn't a common ancestor that eventually evolved to have that would descend down, and some of them would turn into bees and some of them would turn into birds. What they've done is they've both got something that allows them to fly. It's the best thing for the job. It's the same as if you remember when we talked about with penguins. Penguins have flippers, fish have flippers, fish have fins. And then we talked about, so penguins, oh, Jesus. How do I draw a penguin? Sort of. So penguins have flippers, whereas fish have fins. Now, even though these structures look similar, they didn't have a common ancestor. We know they don't have a common ancestor because they're two different So there just happens to be, this is the best job, this is the best structure for the job. So that's why we call this an analogous structure. It's the same, it does the same job, but in a little bit different way. This is called convergent evolution. So homologous structures are linked with divergent evolution. There was once an ancient animal that had an arm, and then that arm has changed for different animals. Analogous structure means, hey, a bunch of different animals want to learn to fly. They're going to develop flying skills in different ways. A bunch of different animals need to master swimming, so they're going to master swimming in different ways. Okay, I'm going to keep this up for another 30 seconds from here. If you haven't got this copy down in 30 seconds, you guys are more than welcome to watch the video at the end when I eventually upload it. But yeah, that's going to be, but we're going to move on to the third and final example. Okay, 5. All right, the third and final example is actually called vestigial structure. This is the one that I had to look up because I did not know about the vestigial structure. What is a vestigial structure? There is something called vestige, or vestige. Vestige means old. So vestigial structure, this is a structure left behind in an organism after evolution. These structures are not needed for the organism to survive. They're good for studying of evolutionary history. In fact, in many cases, vestigial structures actually can cause harm to the organism rather than helping the organism out. So one of the things that organisms what happens with organisms, they usually start to evolve and get rid of that structure because it doesn't help them anymore. Maybe back in the day, this structure did help them, but then as they've evolved, they just don't need it. There's actually a couple of examples in human beings. So it says here, the example that I've said in this picture is a procedural structure in an anatomical feature or behavior that no longer seems to have a purpose in the current form of the organism, which is pretty much what it said. So an appendix is the classic example of an anatomical vestigial structure. Human beings, it is thought that the appendix used to exist in human beings when we would eat grass. So when we were mammals that would eat lots of grass, we used our appendix to help us process the grass in our big intestines. Now, because we don't eat grass anymore, it doesn't make the appendix is actually not a useful. It's no longer a useful organ. It doesn't do a certain purpose. So therefore, it's kind of wasted. But you know, does that mean we can still eat grass? Someone Min asked. No, we can't actually eat grass because we've evolved so we can't eat grass. The appendix is just left over. It used to help us eat grass, but yeah, because because we can't eat grass anymore, it's like, well, what's the point of having an appendix? That's why you can get your appendix removed and be completely healthy because you don't need it. It doesn't do anything. Speaking of eating grass, yeah, if you take it out, you'll be fine. A lot of people have their appendix removed because not a lot of people, some people get their appendix removed because it might get inflamed. If you ever feel my mother had her appendix removed. One of my pointless fears, ladies and gents, I can't believe I'm telling class of year 10 students, one of my pointless fears that I grew up with all the way through all the way through primary school and high school was that one day my appendix would explode because what happens is it can get blocked and then it gets inflamed. And I was always worried, like, oh my God, my appendix is going to explode and I'm just going to, die and it's going to be scary. It's like, it has not happened to me yet. It hasn't happened to anyone that I've known. It's obviously more rare to have your appendix to get your appendix out is very, very rare, apparently, in comparison to what I thought. So yeah, don't worry about it. If you start to get some severe pains in your on the right side of your body in your gut, then you may go see a doctor pretty quickly because you may have appendicitis. But it's very rare, I think. It doesn't actually explode. I always did when I was really young. I thought that's what happened. I thought it was like, oh my God, it's going to explode. My guts is going to go everywhere. It just sort of ruptures and sort of spills, not great blood through your body. So it's a good idea to get it fixed before it does that. Speaking of eating grass, though, wisdom teeth are an extra set of molars at the back of our teeth. Again, wisdom teeth molars are designed for grinding grass and stuff. So as we evolved to eat more meat and fruit and stuff, we didn't need to eat grass. So therefore our molars, we seem to get less molars. And so now wisdom teeth, they're not useful. Wisdom teeth are the teeth at the back of your mouth. Again, you can get these guys removed and they don't actually cause any problems. Now, a lot of people, I had all 4 of my wisdom teeth pulled out. And they were because some of them were coming through, and like some of you guys, with full respect, I had braces. I did not want to get my 2 years of wearing braces screwed up because my wisdom teeth were going to push all my teeth out of alignment again. So I got my wisdom teeth taken out. Completely fine, didn't need them to survive, wasn't useful to me. Nowadays, people tend to usually get two wisdom teeth taken out in the dentist chair. It's a new thing. It's kind of weird because it's like 20 years ago, it was like if you got your wisdom teeth out, you'd be, you would take you 2 weeks to recover. Nowadays, it takes 4 days to recover from having all 4 wisdom teeth taken out. And even nowadays, they don't even take all 4 of them out. They only take 1 or 2 out at a time. And saying that, though, there are some weird freaks in genetics that actually manage to grow wisdom teeth without in their mouths, and they don't need to get them removed. They just have an extra set of teeth, because why not? Last but not least, goosebumps. If you ever get goosebumps, that's because it's your body is trying to put trying to fluff up the hair on your body. But because we don't have long hair, because we're no longer apes, it doesn't really work. And even if you have long hair on your legs, it still doesn't stick up. So goosebumps don't really work as they were intended. So they're a vestigial structure. We just don't need them. There's some questions in chat that have come up, so I'm going to have a quick look at that. So, and probably some just general things. So, there are a couple of people asking about the anesthetic. Isn't it supposed to be painful? Yeah, when you get your wisdom teeth out, it is a little bit painful usually, but after but it's not like the end of the world agony, because most of the time they do it pretty well. Usually for the first two days, your mouth swells up and you get all puffy. And after 2 days, the next 2 days, you start to go down. You get a little bit of bruising. Sometimes you get a little bit of bruising. Sometimes you get no bruising. And then after 4 days, you're pretty much fine. They use pretty powerful drugs. I used to, when I was getting it fixed, I was on some hardcore drugs for the first 2 days. But again, as I said, after 2 days, you're pretty much fine. They knock you out a lot. You can get high of some anesthetic. That is true. So nitrous oxide was is an anesthetic that was actually used as a party drug. That was the party drug of choice in the 60s. It's like, oh, let's get high of nitrous oxide. People still do get high of nitrous oxide nowadays. It's called Nangs. They're in like cartridges. But yeah, it's not as popular. There are other like marijuana and like other ecstasy, other party drugs are more popular nowadays. But yeah, anyway, point is, those are the three. Can we continue? Yeah, let's jump in. So those are the three types of structures. That's it. Last, I've got a quick picture here. This is actually the vestigial pelvic bone of a whale. Whales don't walk. Whales don't have legs anymore. They don't really need a pelvis, but they still have a pelvic bone in their body. It's just this bone that's, you know, sits in the middle of
So
the.
small.
Hmm?
It's so small. Like it's just that one thing over the, like in that big body.
Yeah, it's a bit weird. The part that I find weird, I'm not sure how accurate this is, but it's just this random bone that just
That's
sits
what I was saying.
nowhere. It's like, okay, and that's, yeah, but that's essentially what a vestigial structure is. You have a random thing that you just don't use. It's like, yeah, everyone here has an appendix in their body. It's like, it doesn't do anything. It just sits around. And so it's like, yeah. Most of you guys probably have wisdom teeth. They don't do anything. And when they do come through, if they do come through, because they usually come through roughly about how old you are now, about 17 or 18, they don't do anything. They don't help you. They definitely don't make you wiser, that's for sure. I don't know why they're called wisdom teeth. Anyway, so those are the three structures. Let's go back over them really quickly. Homologous, same structure, different animals, different organisms, same structure, different plants. It's just, you know, that's because they once, a long, long time ago, had a great grandparent that they both diverged from. And their arm, you know, they've evolved the arm to suit their purpose. Analogous structures is like the opposite, is when they've got a job that needs to get done, whether it be swimming through the water, flying through the air, cracking open nuts, whatever you have to do. An analogous structure means it's a very similar looking structure. It does the same job, but it looks different on different animals. And vestigial structures, these are the leftovers. Once you've evolved and you don't need a structure, sometimes the structures don't go away immediately. They stick around for a while. Ladies and gents, what are we going to do for the rest of this lesson, which is only 5 minutes, so it's not really